A sunny October adventure in the Australian Outback was supposed to be a routine pig hunting trip with friends. Instead, it turned into a haunting mystery. 27-year-old Jeremiah Jayo Rivers set out on this journey and was never seen again. His disappearance in the remote wilderness of southwestern Queensland has left his family desperate for answers and sparked intense speculation. How could a young man simply vanish without a trace? This is the baffling story of Jayo's disappearance and the quest to uncover what really happened on that fateful trip. A hunting trip gone wrong. In mid-October 2021, Jayo joined a group of 6 other men on a road trip through the Australian Outback. The plan was to drive from Victoria towards the Northern Territory, camping and hunting feral pigs along the way. Jayo, originally from the East Kimberley region of Western Australia, was an experienced outdoorsman and a talented Australian rules footballer. The men traveled in 2 4-wheel drive vehicles, eager for adventure and living off the land. However, because it was during COVID-19 border restrictions, their journey wasn't entirely above board. They were crossing state lines illegally to reach their destination. The group eventually set up camp at a remote spot known as Whippo Creek, near the tiny town of Nakundra in southwest Queensland. The landscape here is harsh and isolated, red dirt, scrubland, and very few signs of civilization. It was the kind of place where you could easily feel completely alone under the vast outback sky. The men made camp by a waterhole, preparing for a night in the bush. According to the group, the trip began to take a strange turn. Jayo was reportedly behaving erratically on the drive north. By their accounts, he and one of his closest friends on the trip, Jojo Cantila Gaydon, had been drinking beer and using methamphetamine during the journey. Jayo was said to be loud and drunk and possibly even hallucinating by the time they reached Whippo Creek. The remote wilderness, combined with substance use and exhaustion from travel, created a tense atmosphere. On the morning of October 18, 2021, just after they had camped, Jayo walked past one of the other men near the waterhole. He mentioned that he wanted to go for a swim to cool off, but complained that the water there wasn't clear enough and he'd look for a better spot. This moment, Jayo heading off on foot in search of cleaner water, is the last time any of his companions admit to seeing him. In one account given later, a friend claimed Jayo was wandering off to find somewhere to swim, possibly disoriented by heat or drugs. In another version of events, Jayo was said to have run after a wild pig that morning and disappeared into the bush. The stories differed, but the outcome was the same. Jayo walked away from the campsite and never came back. The delayed search. When Jayo failed to return, one would expect his friends to immediately raise the alarm. Instead, what happened next raised many eyebrows and later drew criticism from authorities. The group did not contact police or emergency services for over a day. They later admitted they were afraid to report Jayo missing at first because they had been breaching COVID travel rules by being in Queensland. They hoped he would turn up on his own, and they feared getting in trouble with the law. So incredibly, about 30 hours passed. In fact, the disappearance only came to light when 2 of the men left the campsite the next day and drove toward Nakundra, possibly to get help or to head back south. Queensland police officers who were monitoring back roads for illegal travelers during the pandemic pulled the pair over near the town. The officers quickly learned about the missing man and escorted those 2 men back toward the New South Wales border. It was only that afternoon, now a full day after Jayo had gone missing, that a formal missing person report was finally made. Once police were notified, a search operation was launched in the unforgiving outback terrain. Initially, local officers and even a nearby pub owner in Nakundra helped scour the immediate area around the campsite and along Whippo Creek. As hours passed with no sign of Jayo, authorities ramped up the search into a massive coordinated effort. Police from multiple jurisdictions, State Emergency Service, SES volunteers, and Aboriginal trackers joined in. They brought in off-road ATVs and trail bikes to cover rough ground, helicopters and fixed-wing aircraft to scan from above, and even police divers to check water holes. Thermal imaging technology was deployed at night to detect any trace of a person in the bush. For days, searchers battled the elements, which included sweltering heat by day and near freezing cold at night, along with the area's challenging Mars-like red earth and scrub. Despite the extensive effort, not a single trace of Jayo was found. No footprints, no discarded clothing or gear, no clues at all. It was as if the Outback had swallowed him whole. After 5 days of intensive searching, authorities made the painful decision to suspend the official search. By that point, given the lack of water and shelter in the area, experts felt that if Jayo had been simply lost or injured out there, he could not have survived. The environment was too harsh to sustain someone without water for more than a week. Still, the end of the formal search did not bring an end to the mystery or the determination of Jayo's family to find him. A family's desperate mission. Jayo's family, including his mother, uncle, and cousins, refused to give up after the authorities pulled back. They traveled to that remote corner of Queensland themselves, hoping to pick up any leads on the ground. The police took them out to the campsite at Whippo Creek, letting the family see the last place Jayo was seen alive. In their grief and urgency, some family members turned to spiritual means for guidance. They described feeling a strong spiritual calling toward a particular area by a river, as if being drawn to where Jayo might be. This intuition was so compelling that it actually convinced the police to briefly reactivate the search. Officers returned to the field with a gyrocopter and a helicopter to examine the specific area the family pointed out. Unfortunately, even with this renewed effort, nothing was discovered. Over the following weeks and months, the family kept pushing for answers. They plastered missing person posters around communities and on social media, and they spoke to news outlets to keep Jayo's story alive. Tips and sightings trickled in from across Queensland and northern New South Wales. Someone thought they saw a man matching Jayo's description, walking along a highway. Another report came from a town miles away, but none of these leads panned out. Every reported sighting turned out to be a dead end or a case of mistaken identity. The family's nightmare was compounded by cruel tricks as well. At one point, scammers contacted them claiming to have kidnapped Jayo and demanding ransom money. This heartless hoax was quickly debunked by police, but it added even more anguish to an already tortured situation. By early 2022, several months after Jayo's disappearance, hope of finding him alive had diminished. Police cadaver dogs were brought in to search the area for human remains, indicating that authorities were now looking for a body rather than a survivor. Even the dogs found nothing. It was as if Jayo had vanished off the face of the earth. With no evidence of Jayo in the wilderness, questions began to mount about whether something else, something criminal, might have happened on that trip. Conflicting stories and rising suspicions. From the very beginning, there were red flags that suggested this was no ordinary case of a bush wanderer succumbing to the elements. First, there was the troubling delay in reporting Jayo missing. Why would friends wait over a day to seek help when a man's life was on the line? The group's explanation was their fear of legal consequences for violating pandemic border rules. But to Jayo's family, that excuse was hard to swallow in exchange for a loved one's safety. This delay potentially cost critical time in the search, and it hinted at the possibility that the men on the trip had other reasons for avoiding the police. Even more unsettling were the inconsistent accounts given by Jayo's companions about what happened before he went missing. As police took statements, they realized the story wasn't adding up. In fact, it was changing from one telling to the next. At various times, members of the hunting party offered at least 7 different versions of the events leading up to Jayo's disappearance. In some tellings, Jayo wandered off calmly, looking for a place to swim. In others, he was chasing after wild pigs. There were mentions that he might have been affected by drugs or heat, acting irrationally. This patchwork of stories raised eyebrows. Why couldn't the 6 men agree on what happened at the campsite? The inconsistent narrative suggested that some or all of them might not be telling the whole truth. Rumors soon surfaced about the real purpose of the trip. One theory was that the pig hunting was just a cover story. Instead, it was alleged that several of the men were actually on a mission to transport a large quantity of illegal cannabis from Victoria to sell in Darwin. According to this theory, Jayo himself might not have been aware of the drug plan when he agreed to join the adventure. As the speculation goes, at some point during the trip, Jayo learned about the drugs and was upset about it. Could a falling out over this have led to violence? One of Jayo's cousins later told investigators he received a frantic Facebook call from Jayo during the trip. Jayo was begging to be picked up and taken home. In that call, Jayo allegedly said he'd had a fist fight with one of the men and that he wanted out of the whole situation immediately. If true, this was a chilling clue that Jayo felt unsafe even before he vanished. The man named in that story, Jojo Cantilla Gaydon, the same friend who traveled and camped with Jayo, denied that any fight ever occurred. He claimed he had actually been trying to stop Jayo from wandering off because Jayo was in a delirious state from days of partying and little sleep. According to Jojo, Jayo had been awake for days, drinking heavily and taking meth, and so his behavior was erratic. Jojo and the others insisted that nothing sinister happened at the camp. They suggested Jayo likely stumbled off into the wilderness and got lost or injured in an accident. They also firmly denied the drug trafficking allegations when those came up in the investigation. Every member of the group, when questioned under oath, flatly refuted the idea that they were smuggling drugs or that they harmed Jayo. It was 6 men's word against a swirl of suspicion and circumstantial clues. The coronial inquest. With no body, no crime scene, and conflicting witness stories, the mystery of Jayo's disappearance was left unresolved for some time. Under intense public pressure and the pleas of Jayo's family, authorities convened a coronial inquest in late 2023 to examine the case in depth. Over several days, the coroner's court in Brisbane heard testimony from about 15 witnesses, including the men who were on the trip and the police investigators involved. The goal was to piece together the truth of what happened at Whippo Creek and to determine, if possible, whether Jayo Rivers was the victim of foul play or a tragic misadventure. As evidence was presented, the picture grew even more disturbing. Phone records and intercepted communications hinted that the men from the trip were in close contact after Jayo vanished, discussing the incident among themselves in ways that some interpreted as coordinated storytelling. The coroner noted that an incriminating inference could be drawn suggesting some ongoing collusion, essentially that the group might have been syncing up their stories before talking to police. The fact that they gave those 7 different accounts was highlighted. Those lies and inconsistencies, the coroner said, could very well have been attempts to mislead investigators. At the very least, even if they weren't directly responsible for harming Jayo, the men might have been covering up other illegal activities, like the alleged cannabis run or the breach of COVID rules, by being untruthful. During the inquest, each theory was explored. On one hand, experts testified about how someone lost in that terrain would fare. Given Jayo's young age and bush knowledge, some felt he might have survived a bit longer if it was simply an accident, unless he was severely dehydrated or injured. There was also testimony about the possibility of natural causes, for example, that Jayo could have succumbed to heat stroke or kidney failure from dehydration if he was wandering in extreme temperatures. This was considered one of the only non-foul play explanations that fit the scenario of no remains found, since the Outback can quickly conceal a body or scatter evidence, especially if wild animals are involved. However, many found it hard to believe that a fit footballer with experience outdoors would just die quietly without leaving any trace. On the other hand, the scenario of intentional harm was scrutinized. The family's lawyer raised the possibility that when Jayo discovered the supposed drug trafficking plot, a confrontation happened. Perhaps, as the lawyer suggested, that confrontation turned violent and Jayo was killed, either on purpose or by accident, and the others hid his body. This theory, while gripping, lacked hard evidence. No blood, no forensic signs of a struggle, and all 6 of the other men maintained their innocence and ignorance of any such plot. By the conclusion of the inquest in October 2024, Coroner Donald McKenzie delivered findings that brought a mix of validation and frustration to Jayo's loved ones. He formally ruled that, on the balance of probabilities, Jeremiah Jayo Rivers was deceased and likely the victim of foul play. In other words, the coroner strongly suspected that Jayo met with harm at the hands of another person or persons during that trip. This ruling acknowledged the many suspicious elements: the delayed reporting, the inconsistent stories, and the possible motives for a cover-up. However, the coroner also acknowledged that he could not identify exactly who was responsible or precisely what happened. He even left room for doubt, noting that while homicide was the reasonable suspicion, there remained a possibility Jayo's death could have been a misadventure. For instance, an accident exacerbated by the environment and perhaps poor decisions by the group. Crucially, because no specific perpetrator or direct evidence of a crime could be established, the coroner did not refer the case for any criminal charges. He had no solid grounds to accuse any one of the 6 men of murder or manslaughter in court. This was heartbreaking for the family. They got official validation that their son likely didn't just wander off and die, but they did not get the closure of justice being served. The inquest findings also criticized the initial police response in some ways. Jayo's family felt that authorities were slow to take their concerns seriously at first, possibly due to dismissive attitudes. There was mention that an officer's notes used insensitive language about the missing person report. The coroner recommended improvements, such as police receiving better training for interacting with indigenous families in missing person cases, showing that the case had highlighted some broader issues as well. Still no answers. Standing on the courthouse steps after the inquest, Jayo's family members, including his uncle Digby Rivers, thanked the coroner for at least recognizing that something sinister may have happened. They expressed gratitude that the truth of the group's shaky story was brought to light. Yet they also voiced their deep disappointment that no one was held accountable. For them, it was unthinkable that a healthy young man would simply vanish forever without someone else knowing exactly why. Jayo's uncle declared that the family would never stop searching for the truth. They had walked the Outback for months on their own, he said, and they would continue to do whatever it takes to find out what became of one of the best young fellas they knew. Today, the case of Jeremiah Jayo Rivers remains open and unsolved. His body has never been found. No arrests have been made. The 6 men who were with him maintain that they have no idea what happened and that they have been unfairly judged by public speculation. Investigators, however, remain suspicious that at least one of those men knows more than they're saying. Queensland police have stated they will continue to follow any new leads in the hope of one day cracking this case. For now, Jayo's story stands as a haunting mystery of the Australian Outback, a place known both for its rugged beauty and its deadly, unforgiving nature. Did Jayo fall victim to that wilderness or to something far more wicked at the hands of supposed friends? It's a question that torments his family every day. They hold on to Jayo's memory, a young man who loved football, family, and adventure, and hold out hope that someone, somewhere will have the courage to come forward with the truth. Until then, all they can do is keep searching the vast emptiness, determined to bring Jayo home, or at least find the answers that can finally grant them peace.